Okay, I think it just started recording. Okay, so we are doing an AP Euro review for this year's AP exam, 2020, the year of the coronavirus, and I'm kind of doing this for my own review because I think it helps when I write down the notes and I go over them, and me talking through it would help me. And I also did this as like a film project because I'm filming this, and so I wanted to kill two birds with one stone in this trying time. Um, and we'll just get started. So we're gonna be doing Unit 1, Renaissance and Age of Exploration, but this one is just going to be over the Renaissance because I need to read up a little bit more on the Age of Exploration. Yeah, so this is just Renaissance. And there are going to be a lot of like bullet points, but I try to like summarize it as best as I could to just get the most necessary information or information that I would like to know. And I try to make each of the slides like clear and double spaced. So yeah. All right. So the Age of Renaissance is basically just the signaling of the end of the Middle Ages, right? And so we're going to have the first Renaissance, we're going to have the Italian Renaissance, and that's going to be based around humanism. And humanism is really just human-centered thinking, secular, and the inspiration for that comes from Greek, Roman, and biblical literature, also known as the classics, and that's what they will be referred to, I'm pretty sure, on the AP exam and in whatever review book you read. And so Renaissance, what that really means is the rebirth of the classics or the revival of the classics. And it focuses on worldliness, and it has less emphasis on church and religious matters. And that's called secularism. So I think that's a really important term for this period for the Renaissance, because that's really like the whole point of it. And another thing that I read up on that I didn't really think about until I read about it was the development of capitalism during the Italian Renaissance. Is that focus on worldly matters led to a development of an economy that's based on raising capital, getting money. So there's going to be increase in trade and technological advancements. And then there's going to be a growth of individual achievement, especially amongst artisans. And they're going to get their own recognition, and they're going to get their fame, and basically they're just getting clout for their work. Okay. And this is more on the art of the Italian Renaissance art, really. And so the art of the Renaissance is going to be known for its realism and for its three-dimensionalness, but it's going to have some classical themes in there. So, I'm sorry, I just burped. There are going to be three artists that you want to know, and I mean, we all know these three. If not three, at least know two. Because Raphael, he doesn't really come to mind. What I think of like the Renaissance usually is Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, but you can have Raphael, you can throw that in there if you want. So he's known for painting School of Athens, and that's this painting on the top right. And you can see how it would be known for its realism. All the figures and the human anatomy is pretty accurate. And there's some, I guess, he throws some classical themes in there. And by that, I mean, there's going to be Plato and Socrates in that painting, where they're standing next to each other. And then the next artist is Michelangelo. And he's going to be known for painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And if you don't really know what that is, it's just, that painting where there's like the fingers or like that. Yeah, that's what I think of. And then also for the statue of David. And that's just, David is a biblical figure, and he's going to make a statue of him. And then the next, I'll talk about patronage after. I should have just put it at the end. I don't know why I didn't. But the next artist, and possibly the most important artist, the most well-known artist, is going to be Leonardo da Vinci. And this man is really amazing. He is everything. He's an engineer, he's an architect, he's a scientist, most importantly, well, probably not most importantly, but most well known as an artist. Very well known for Mona Lisa, and that's just where I'm going to leave it because no one cares about anything else. Mona Lisa. Um, so this art is going to come from patronage, and artists are going to have a lot of sponsors that are going to be commissioning their art, and those sponsors are mostly going to be from the papacy. I think I'm saying it right. Just make sure you know how to spell it. And the Medici family, and I'll talk about them a bit later on. But just know that those artists, they get um, their art comes from the wealthy people, the elites, who are able to pay for those art. Yeah. So some characteristics of Renaissance art, and this is just mostly, I guess, Italian is where I put under. It's going to be the use of oil paints, because before, during the Middle Ages, they would literally just paint on like wet plaster. It would be why did I say plaster? But they would paint on wet plaster, and it would just be like very loose water painting on plaster. Oftentimes it would be on wood or like just on a wall. And this other word, I don't know how to say it, chiaroscuro, I think. But I mean, I don't think you need to use that term for the test. I like to just think of how there's a contrast between light and dark in Renaissance art. So that's easier for me. That works for you. Good. And another one, probably the most important characteristic of Renaissance art, is the single point perspective. So what that does is, I show that example in the top right corner. So it's basically where like the whole painting has one point of like in the center, or just wherever, one point where the visual is going to be focused on. So what that does is it makes the painting more three-dimensional and very realistic, and it's going to add a depth of field to the paintings. And yeah, so I never know how to pronounce his name. I mean, Petrarch. So I put this man on his own slide because I mean, he did a lot of things. He is very important because he is the founder of Renaissance humanism. Not the founder of Renaissance, but humanism. Also, the father of humanism is what they call him. His full name is Francesco Petrarch, but you don't need to know the first name. Literally just know the last name, it's fine. And he was fascinated with ancient classics, and really just his role was for reviving classicalism. And what he did was he was obsessed with ancient Roman literature and works, and he learned classical Latin. And that's important because classical Latin was what most of the classical works were written in. So that's like your Greek literature, your Roman literature, they were all written in classical Latin. And he learned that so he could, do his research and read all those. He rediscovered Cicero's letters, and he followed Cicero's style. And Cicero was, I believe he was a Roman author, I think, but I don't know. This is just for me. But he rediscovered Cicero's letter, and he followed his style, and that's going to be very influential on other humanists who are going to follow in his footsteps. And so a lot of people kind of criticize Petrarch for being crazy, like being such a stan about classical works, and they were like, that's not really Christian of you. And what he said was, he kind of twisted it around. He said, well, I could learn from the classics and apply it to my religion, which was Christianity. So he was like, I could apply it to become a better Christian. So that was his take on that. And that's really what civic humanists are going to be. And so civic humanists believed in using classical knowledge and education for public good, for the greater good. And that's going to be really their main principle. And that's going to tie into learning from the classics and applying it to Christianity. All right, so other Renaissance humanists, I say humanists, but there's really only one I personally care about, is Castiglione, for his work, The Courtier. Yeah. So what that book did, or work, I guess, literary work, is it described what the ideal Renaissance man was. And what a Renaissance man is really is just a man that knows a bunch of languages and is super cultured, a man that's familiar with the classical works. Yeah, and also, this one's going to be really important. I mean, I remember from some AP World, when I took AP World, some of the questions would be, they would ask about women in history. And so this women in the Renaissance were usually wealthy, secular women in the Renaissance. They learned how to read and write. So literate women in the Renaissance are mostly going to be the rich and the elite. One woman, you probably don't really have to know her, and I mean, you probably didn't even know about her. I didn't even know about her until I read my Princeton Review. I wrote this one for the girls. Her name was Christine de Pizan, and she was an Italian poet, and she was literate. She knew how to read, she knew how to write, and she is known for her work, The City of Ladies. And basically her argument was, she argued against the belief that women were inferior to men. And she felt that women needed their own space, or a city of ladies, to really flourish. So yeah, love that. That's a picture of her on the right. I don't think it's the best picture, but yeah, thought she was cool. All right, so this next one is really just talking about why Italy was the center of the Renaissance, and it was. And one place in Italy that you really need to know is the city of Florence. That was the cultural center, I guess. So they're going to be wealthy. Really, it has a lot of wealth from the ports, and it's going to be the trade and the cultural center. Right, and all the money is gonna come from families, bank families like the Medici I mentioned before, and they would commission art to really flex their wealth. Like they want to brag, like, look how much money I have, and it's like it's just rich people buying really expensive art to show off how rich they are and be obnoxious. And churches are also gonna commission artists to make their churches look nice. Yeah, so that's the papacy. Papacy? Yeah. Also, Italy is going to be the geographical center of classical architecture. So it's going to be surrounded by Greek and Roman architecture, and that's going to serve as the inspiration for the Renaissance. And Renaissance, one thing you need to keep in mind is that it was not for everyone. It was not universal. Not everyone partook in it, or partook in it, because it was only for the rich people, because only rich people had, the luxury, the time, and the money to really focus on stuff. Other regular people were worried about not dying and like being able to eat and stuff. But it wasn't universal, but it definitely spread up north. And that's when Northern Renaissance comes from. So Northern Renaissance and Italian Renaissance, they're going to be two completely different things. Italian Renaissance was more secular, more worldly, and Northern Renaissance is going to be more focused on social reform, and that social reform is going to be based on Christian principles and religious beliefs. So that's when we get Christian humanism. And that's really just the Christian spin on humanism. So we're going to have people like Erasmus and Thomas More. Erasmus wrote Praise of Folly. And the only thing you need to know about it really is just it's a satire criticism of the church. And it's going to mock the church and kind of write about, what's wrong with the church, like the flaws within the church. And Erasmus really felt like the church just needed improvement, it needed reform. Thomas More wrote Utopia, and it's a book about really a utopian island society with religious and social ideals, just about a utopia. And like Petrarch, they were learning from the classical works to become better Christians, to become better people. And Northern Renaissance art, there's really not much about it, but it's realistic, just like the Italian Renaissance art, but it's pretty normal everyday stuff. So it's not going to be, you know, fantastical. It's not going to be dreamy and, you know, super pretty all the time. It's less focused on philosophers, and it's more focused on real life. So if you think about it, another way I think about it is kind of like street photography. You know, it captures the everyday life, and I think in a way it's more realistic than the Italian Renaissance. So on the bottom right is going to be an example of Northern Renaissance art. So you see peasants living their everyday life in their villages, in their little towns. So yeah. Next one, printing press. This one is super, super important. It's a very important idea that you have to get. Well, the printing press was invented by, well, his name is Johannes Gutenberg, but you really just need to know last names. No one cares about their first names. But it was invented by Gutenberg in the 1450s. You don't necessarily need to know the time, but roughly 1450s. And it was hella important for Renaissance, like super important for the Renaissance, and really for everything else that happens in history, honestly. But it was super important for the Renaissance because it was through the printing press that people knew more about it, that it spread. Also, it was thanks to the printing press that there was a mass production of information. So it's kind of like Twitter in the old ages, really. You know how people, like, nowadays you don't really read the news. It's like the newspaper, but you know how information spreads on Twitter. That's printing press. That's what the printing press did. So it also led to increased literacy. So people are gonna know more people are gonna know how to read, more people are gonna know how to write because of the printing press, because they're gonna have access to reading material. And it also led to this appreciation for vernacular literature, or vernacular literature. And so what that is really just going to be the common language that everyone knows, that everyone can really understand. It's not going to be complex. It's going to be really simple, and it's common people language, and it's kind of like young people slang. You know, it doesn't take a lot to really get it. So that's what vernacular literature is. That's how I think of it. And like I said, the printing press is going to play a huge role in spreading the Renaissance, but it's also going to be super important for the Reformation era, because that's when it's going to spread the ideas of, you know, reform and social reform, and, you know, what's wrong with the church, and it's going to help lead to the Reformation. All right, up next. Oh, I don't think I have any more next. Okay, that's about it. That's it. Let me see. Let me go over the notes if there's anything else. No, I think this is really all you need to know about the Renaissance, really. And I mean, obviously, there's definitely more information. There's always more information, but for this exam, you really want to, you know, simplify the information to what you think you need to know and what you think is the most important. And this is what I felt was the most important. So, yep. Thank you for watching.